Hi everyone, I am Owen Smith and I sit as the Sales and Marketing Director at CloudCover IT. We are recording a video this morning just looking to talk about IT security. There are some misconceptions that we're keen to address, and also we want to flag up what we see and what we feel as an IT service provider are the most important things for organisations to be thinking about, particularly SMEs. First and foremost, I mentioned misconception there. One of the things we often spend our time have spent our time addressing in recent years is that we don't present ourselves outwardly as an IT security specialist. We are an IT service provider. One of our core service offerings is IT managed service solutions. What that means in practice often is that we are responsible for IT for numerous organisations. We sit as an outsourced function, but as a strategic IT partner responsible both for handling IT support, but also driving strategic IT decisions in terms of core systems, core infrastructure, and the security posture that exists within that and around that. And so that's a big thing for us. We took the step starting off this year, being 2022, to formally attain our ISO 27001 certification. That was a big step for us as an organisation, and it was really important in sharing both with existing and potential new customers how important IT security is, both to our internal practices and processes, but also outwardly and the approach we take on behalf of the clients who trust us to implement robust security posture within their IT operations and infrastructure. So that's been really, really important. And in terms of the context for IT security, I think it's well known and become a well-known fact that the risk associated with cyber attacks and the volume and intensity of those cyber attacks is continually increasing. We're seeing that you only have to do a simple Google search, type in the word cyber attack, and you'll be flooded with stories of organisations of all different shapes and sizes across industry sectors who have been at the receiving end of a cyber attack in varying scales and sizes and cost, essentially. I think some of the stats show, I think in 2021-22, the cost in terms of losses of cyber attack, in terms of cyber crime in the UK alone, was greater than £3 billion. So that goes some way to just explain the potential extent of these issues. Any IT service business or any company, any IT professional anywhere who tells you that they can remove 100% of the risk of cyber attack simply isn't being truthful. That simply isn't the case. These attacks range from very sort of basic and elementary in their efforts to being very complex, very intelligent cyber attacks, and there are lots of hard-working IT professionals and IT security specialists out there in the marketplace doing all they can to limit the risk. And I think any IT organisation, that's the best we can, or any IT professional, that's the best we can hope to do is implement IT security systems and solutions and training to reduce the risk of being at the receiving end of cyber attack. And that's a big part of what we do here at CloudCover, and it's a big part, I'm sure, of for all IT service providers, for all internal IT teams, is both building that robust security architecture within IT operations, and also delivering training to users to ensure that they have a good knowledge level in terms of what cyber attacks look like, what things to look out for, how to respond in the event that you think that there has been an incident or that there has been an issue, and all of that. And that's something that we do here at CloudCover. Another one of the big things that we spend a lot of time talking to our clients about is MFA, or multi-factor authentication. MFA is a relatively simple to implement solution which has a really positive impact on security architecture within organisations. For those who don't know, MFA is essentially the use of multiple authentication solutions to enter into an IT estate in simple terms. So what that usually means is that you would use your typically still the most common sort of first attempt of access into systems is username and password. That's what we see most of. What MFA then requires is for a secondary form, for example, the Microsoft Authenticator app on a mobile phone, which will deliver a code, an entry code, which you need to input in that system to then enter and have access to that system and the data that lives inside of that. What that does and what MFA does, it's been seen, and there's lots of data out there, varying stats that will suggest anywhere from 80 to 95% of those sort of basic cyber attacks are thwarted by MFA alone. Things like password theft or stealing of credentials, they no longer work unilaterally to enter and gain access to systems because that user has seen a secondary thing, say a secondary authentication process saying, is this you? And they're saying, no, I've not attempted to sign, reject, and that access is denied. And that thwarts an awful lot of the sort of elementary cyber attacks that we see out there in the marketplace. MFA is something that we looked to implement as standard across our managed service customer base, and we recommend to all organisations, particularly SMEs, to have that in place to deliver that foundational level of security, and that is hugely important. And any organisation who doesn't have that in place and doesn't know how to go about implementation of that, we'd encourage to speak to us. We'd be more than happy to help with that and talk through why we're suggesting that in more detail and what that looks like and the different options that you have available to you for implementation of MFA. The other thing that we're seeing grow quite significantly in terms of demand is Cyber Essentials certification. Cyber Essentials has been around now for a number of years. I don't think I'd be speaking out of turn to say in its first year or so, and it was new to market and it was evolving in terms of its value, its credibility, and what it represented and what it showed to outward organisations, whether it was organisations looking to procure services or to work with a partner. What we have seen though at the beginning of 2022, there was an enhancement in the criteria of the Cyber Essentials framework. And what that did was it increased the rigour of the assessment, it increased the areas being looked at, and essentially enhanced the credibility of the certification. What we are seeing now from our customer base and from organisations that aren't currently customers is a growing demand to have Cyber Essentials certification in place. What they express that does is that often now it's gone from being a kind of nice to have in procurement processes to being a need to have for procurement processes. The same applies to grant funding or public sector funding requirements. It's becoming a requirement for organisations to attain that funding, whether that be, as I say, grant funding or public sector framework funding, that is in place. What we see is, it's also what we're seeing with the likes of cyber insurance, that the cyber insurance providers are now saying you need to have Cyber Essentials certification in place. We're seeing customers in the private sector ask for that from their suppliers as a prerequisite of working with them. I think it's great to see the evolution of Cyber Essentials as a recognised UK national framework on cyber or IT security. It ensures that basically a foundational level of security exists within an organisation's IT architecture that is proven to limit the risk of the most common cyber attacks. It includes things like MFA has to be in place, multi-factor authentication has to be in place for organisations. It looks at things like mobile device management, it looks at things like up-to-date systems and operating systems in that environment, up-to-date hardware, and all of these things, and again just provides that foundational level of IT security in organisations. I think that's a really positive and healthy thing. Cloud IT, we obviously sit as an IT service provider, and we also are ISO 27001 accredited. We support our organisations to attain Cyber Essentials certification, to implement the change or the upgrades potentially to their environment that allows them to meet the criteria there. That's something that they absolutely can and do for organisations. And so if anybody is seeing this video and thinking that is something we need to address, but again we don't know where to start, we don't know how to go about that, please speak to us. We'd be delighted to help. The next thing I was keen to chat about is backups, data backups. The area in particular I'm keen to I think backups has become a relatively well-known space to organisations. The need to have your data backed up in the event that your main IT system data source is impacted or affected with something like ransomware or malware, that you have then that backup so that your operations are not impacted to such a significant extent. I think that has become relatively well known, and again we would stress the importance of having working, effective backups in place. Our technical teams here can go into more detail into what that could and should look like for your organisation, because that's very much dependent on what you have and where you have it, in terms of being on premise or in cloud or hybrid, and then our team can come up with it, and for all of our customers certainly we look at, okay, what does an effective, robust backup process implementation look like for you. One area where it's not so well known is around Microsoft 365. Now CloudCare, we obviously sit as a Microsoft Gold partner, and we are experts by any measure in terms of Microsoft 365 and supporting organisations to both implement Microsoft 365, to get more from Microsoft 365, and to build on an existing Microsoft 365 ecosystem in organisations. We have expertise here across the 365 ecosystem, as well as the Microsoft Power Platform. We have a team of SharePoint developers, and we are very, very well placed in terms of that ecosystem and how organisations can effectively leverage that. One thing we do a lot of work on with our existing customers and with any organisation we're speaking to around a Microsoft 365 project is the need to back up data that exists in Microsoft 365. More and more organisations are using Microsoft 365 as for what it can be, which is an effective data management, collaboration and productivity ecosystem, and lots of organisational data for that reason is living in that ecosystem. And sometimes with a cloud system like Microsoft 365, there's kind of an expectation that data is secure and that data is backed up. Microsoft are very, very clear that the responsibility for backing up that data doesn't sit with them. They've released something. If anybody wants to go and do independent research, if you type in the Microsoft shared responsibility model, what we will see is basically a framework where Microsoft say this is what we're responsible for and what is included with your Microsoft 365 license and environment, and here's what you're responsible for. In terms of the organisational responsibilities within that shared responsibility model, that includes things like accidental deletion, intentional deletion from a user that's intentionally made decisions with a detrimental impact, like deleting important data or something of that nature. Things like ransomware, Microsoft are very clear that they are not responsible for backup of data in the event where any of these things happen. You do have access to obviously retention policies and things like that within your Microsoft 365 admin center, and you can implement things that give a level of retention and a level of protection. But there are, and we continually see situations where organisations come and say this data has been deleted by an user, or it's been, and maybe it was out with this 30, 60 and 90-day retention policy that exists, and the answer unfortunately in lots of those situations is that data is gone. So what we do is we highly recommend the implementation of Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. There are other Microsoft 365 backup solutions available. That is, we've done our research, and we obviously have a relationship with Veeam already for backup and disaster recovery solutions. We've looked at the other solutions available in the marketplace, and we feel that the Veeam 365 backup solution is the best available. It's very, very good. And what that does is it gives that coverage. It gives that coverage in that Microsoft shared responsibility model that I mentioned. It gives the coverage on the areas which sit as organisational responsibility. It ensures that you have data backup, whether it be in the event of accidental or intentional data deletion, ransomware, malware, these things. It can also handle, for example, compliance requirements. We have organisations who, due to the industry they operate in, they are bound to hold certain data for X period of time, and have that backup of that data in place and make sure that is in no circumstance lost, deleted, etc. And the implementation of Veeam 365 Backup is a relatively cost-efficient solution which meets those needs. So any organisation using Microsoft 365 who has data, organisational data, living in Microsoft 365, we'd certainly be really keen to have a conversation with and help increase that knowledge and understanding of why Microsoft 365's data backup is needed, what it looks like, what it delivers, and scope that solution to fit. That's something we'd be more than happy to sit and do with any organisation.